The messenger of Allah was dead. The man through whom revelation had descended, who had walked among them, who had led them in prayer just days before, was gone, and the city of Madinah was shaking with a grief so total that grown men could not stand upright. Some refused to believe it. Some drew their swords in confusion, not knowing who to fight, only knowing that the unbearable had happened, and their minds could not hold it. This was the single most dangerous moment in the history of Islam, more dangerous than Badr, more dangerous than the trench dug around Madinah, because this was not an enemy at the gates. This was the foundation of the entire faith appearing, in that instant, to crumble from within. And it was in this moment, when the most beloved man to ever walk the earth lay still, that one man stood up, walked outside, and spoke words that would hold the entire religion of Islam together, with nothing but raw conviction. That man was Abu Bakr, and what he did in the hours, days, and years that followed is one of the most underappreciated rescues in human history, because without him, there may have been no Islam left to inherit. Before we go further, tell me in the comments where you are watching this from. Wherever you are in the world right now, type your city or your country, because there is something powerful about realizing how far this message has traveled, carried by people just like you, who refuse to let this history fade into silence. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, do it now, because we are telling these stories the way they deserve to be told, with the weight and the accuracy they deserve, and you do not want to miss what comes next. To understand what Abu Bakr did, you have to understand who he was before that day. He was not a soldier who rose through conquest. He was not a king's son. He was a merchant of Makkah, a man known across the city for his honesty, for his gentle dealings, for a character so trustworthy that people called him Ash-Shiddiq, the truthful one, long before he ever heard the word Islam. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, first received revelation and shared it quietly with those closest to him, it was Abu Bakr who believed instantly, without hesitation, without demanding proof, without asking for a miracle to be performed in front of him. He simply looked at the man he had known for years, the man whose honesty he had tested in business and in friendship for decades, and he said, in essence, "If you say it, then it is true." That single moment of faith, offered without conditions, is part of why scholars have said that the faith of Abu Bakr, if placed on one side of a scale against the faith of the entire ummah on the other side, would outweigh it. This was not blind loyalty. This was a man whose entire life of honest dealing had prepared him to recognize truth instantly when it stood in front of him. From that day forward, Abu Bakr's life became inseparable from the mission of the Prophet. He spent his wealth freeing slaves who had accepted Islam and were being tortured for it. He endured mockery and danger in Makkah alongside the Prophet. And when the moment came that the Prophet had to flee Makkah under threat of assassination, it was Abu Bakr, and only Abu Bakr, chosen to accompany him on that journey to Medina. They hid together in the cave of Thar, while their enemies searched for them just outside, close enough to be heard. In that cave, in the darkness, with death possibly seconds away, the Qur'an describes the Prophet comforting his frightened companion, telling him not to grieve, for Allah was with them. This is recorded in the Qur'an itself, in Surah At-Tawbah, where Allah refers to the second of the two who took refuge in the cave. That companion was Abu Bakr. He was present at the birth of the Hijrah itself, present at the foundation of the Muslim community in Medina, present at Badr, at Uhud, at the trench, at the conquest of Makkah, at every major turning point. He gave his daughter Aisha in marriage to the Prophet. He was, by every measure, the second pillar upon which the early Muslim community stood. And then, the first pillar was gone. When the news of the Prophet's death spread through Medina, panic did not simply appear, it exploded. Umar ibn al-Khattab, a man known for his fierce strength, was so overcome with denial that he stood before the people declaring that the Prophet could not have died, that he had merely been taken up as Musa had been taken up, and that he would return. The community was on the edge of complete psychological collapse. It was Abu Bakr who arrived, who walked through the crowd, who climbed up where people could see him, and who spoke words that history would never forget. He reminded the people, in essence, that whoever worshipped Muhammad should know that Muhammad has died, but whoever worships Allah should know that Allah is alive and never dies. Then he recited the verse from the Qur'an reminding the people that Muhammad was only a messenger, that messengers before him had passed away, and that the deen does not depend on the survival of any one man, but on the eternal truth he was sent to deliver. The effect was immediate. It was as if the entire population of Medina heard that verse for the first time, even those who had memorized it years before. Umar himself later said that his legs gave way beneath him when he heard it, and he fell to the ground, because in that single moment, the truth replaced the shock, and the community remembered what it was actually built upon. This was only the first crisis. Within hours, before the Prophet's body had even been buried, an even more dangerous fracture appeared. The Ansar, the native people of Madinah, who had sacrificed so much to host and protect the Muslims after the Hijrah, gathered in a hall to discuss leadership, and there was real concern that the unity of the ummah itself might split along tribal lines between the Ansar of Medina and the Muhajirun who had emigrated from Mecca. This is one of the most overlooked dangers in early Islamic history. Had this fracture deepened, the Muslims might have torn themselves apart from the inside before any external enemy ever had the chance to strike a single blow. Abu Bakr, along with Umar and others, rushed to that gathering, and rather than asserting his own right by force, or playing tribal politics, Abu Bakr stood and reminded everyone present of the sacrifices of the Muhajirun, while honoring deeply the sacrifices of the Ansar, and proposed a path that emphasized unity over division. It was in this gathering, known as the meeting at Saqifah, that Umar took Abu Bakr's hand and gave him the Pledge of Allegiance, recognizing him as the leader the community needed, and others quickly followed. The wisdom here was not simply political maneuvering. It was the recognition, shared by the senior companions, that Abu Bakr possessed something rare, a stillness under pressure, a closeness to the Prophet that gave his words moral weight, and a complete absence of personal ambition that made people trust he was acting only for the sake of the deen. He accepted the position not with celebration, but with visible humility and even reluctance, fully aware of the weight now placed on his shoulders. In his very first address to the Muslims as their leader, he said words that have been preserved and repeated throughout Islamic history for 14 centuries, words that should be remembered by every leader in every generation. He told the people that he had been placed in authority over them, though he was not the best among them, and that if he did well, they should help him, and if he did wrong, they should correct him. He told them that the truthful person and the liar should not be equal in their eyes, that the truthful one deserved to feel safe, and the liar deserved to feel exposed. He told them that the weak among them was strong in his eyes until their right was secured, and that the strong among them was weak in his eyes until they returned what was not rightfully theirs. He closed by reminding them that obedience to him only held as long as he obeyed Allah and his messenger, and that the moment he disobeyed, their obedience to him was no longer required. Sit with that for a moment. In an age and a region where rulers crowned themselves with divine right and ruled by fear, a man stood up on his first day of leadership and told his own people to correct him if he was wrong, and that they owed him nothing if he strayed from the truth. This was not political theater. Those who knew him knew he meant every word, and his entire caliphate proved it. But humility and unity inside Madinah were only half the battle. Almost immediately, word began arriving from across the Arabian Peninsula that tribe after tribe, having pledged loyalty to Islam during the Prophet's lifetime, were now turning away. Some abandoned the faith entirely. Some refused to pay zakat, claiming that their obligation had been personal to the Prophet and ended with his death. Some followed false claimants to prophethood, who emerged opportunistically in this moment of apparent weakness, men like Musaylimah in the region of Yamama, who declared himself a prophet and gathered a dangerous following. This period became known as the Ridda, the Wars of Apostasy, and it was, without exaggeration, an existential threat to the survival of Islam as a unified religion and community. If these rebellions had succeeded, if these fractures had been allowed to spread unchecked, the religion brought by the Prophet could have splintered into a scattering of regional cults and disputes within a single generation. The Qur'an's preservation could have been thrown into chaos, and the entire trajectory of human history would have changed. The senior companions in Madinah, men whose courage had never been questioned, looked at the scale of this crisis, and many of them recommended caution. Some suggested negotiating with the tribes who refused zakat, allowing them to keep their prayer while excusing their financial obligation, reasoning that this might prevent a wider war the young Muslim community could not yet afford. Even Umar, a man not easily described as soft, leaned toward this compromise, believing it might be wiser to fight only those who had abandoned the faith entirely, while showing leniency to those who merely refused the zakat payment. Abu Bakr refused. He stood firm and declared that he would fight anyone who separated prayer from zakat, because the Prophet had joined them together as one obligation, and that even if they withheld so much as a single rope used to tie a camel, which had been given as zakat in the Prophet's time, he would fight them for it. This was not stubbornness. This was Abu Bakr understanding something with terrifying clarity that others had not yet grasped, that the Deen of Islam was not a collection of optional practices to be picked apart by convenience, and that if the precedent were set now, in this fragile first moment, that obligations could be selectively discarded after the Prophet's death, the entire religion would be hollowed out within years by every tribe, every generation, every convenient interpretation that followed. He drew a line in the sand that the rest of the companions eventually recognized as not only correct, but as the very thing that saved the integrity of the religion. Umar himself later said that he came to recognize Abu Bakr's wisdom in that decision and accepted that the truth had been with him. What followed was a series of military campaigns of extraordinary difficulty, fought not against a foreign empire, but against fellow Arabs, men some companions had once called brothers, in lands the small Muslim army knew intimately. Abu Bakr organized multiple columns of fighters under capable commanders, the most legendary among them being Khalid ibn al-Walid, a man whose tactical brilliance had once been turned against the Muslims at Uhud before his conversion, and who now became one of the fiercest defenders of the faith he had once fought. Khalid moved against the rebellious tribes with relentless speed, confronting Musaylimah's forces in the brutal Battle of Yamama, a battle so costly in lives on both sides that it became known among the companions as one of the hardest days the Muslims had ever fought, harder in some ways than the great battles against the Quraysh, because here the enemy fought with equal ferocity and equal familiarity with Muslim tactics. Many companions who had memorized large portions of the Qur'an directly from the Prophet were killed in this battle, a tragedy that would set the stage for the next great crisis Abu Bakr would have to face. That crisis came in the form of a quiet but urgent warning from Umar. After the heavy losses of memorizers of the Qur'an at Yamama and in other battles of the Ridda Wars, Umar approached Abu Bakr with a fear that had been growing in his heart. He worried that as more of these reciters passed away in battle, the Qur'an itself, which until that point existed primarily in the memories of the companions and on scattered pieces of parchment, bone, and leather, could eventually be lost or corrupted if no single, authoritative, complete written copy existed. Abu Bakr's first reaction was hesitation, not because he disagreed with the importance of the task, but because he feared doing something the Prophet himself had not explicitly done in that exact form. This is one of the most beautiful and instructive moments in early Islamic history, because it shows two of the most senior companions of the Prophet wrestling honestly and humbly with how to protect the religion without overstepping its boundaries. Umar persisted, presenting his reasoning with patience, and eventually, Abu Bakr's heart was moved, and he later said that Allah had placed the same conviction in his own heart that Umar had felt. He commissioned Zayd ibn Thabit, a young companion known for his precision and his service as one of the Prophet's scribes, to undertake the monumental task of collecting the Qur'an into a single, authoritative written compilation, cross-checking every verse against multiple witnesses and written fragments before it was accepted. Zayd himself described the weight of this responsibility as heavier than carrying a mountain. The result of that effort, completed under Abu Bakr's authority and later preserved and standardized further during the Caliphate of Uthman, is the reason the Qur'an exists today exactly as it was revealed, without a single letter altered across 14 centuries. Every Qur'an held in every hand on every continent in the world today exists in its current preserved form, partly because of a decision made in a moment of grief and fear by a man who almost said no, until he trusted the wisdom of his closest companion and the guidance of Allah. By the end of the Ridda Wars, the rebellious tribes had been brought back into the fold of the ummah, the false prophets had been defeated, and the unity of the Arabian Peninsula under the banner of Islam had not only been preserved, but strengthened. What had begun as the most dangerous moment in Islamic history ended with the religion more consolidated than it had ever been, the Qur'an secured in written form, and the precedent set that the deen would not be diluted by convenience or fractured by political ambition. Abu Bakr's Khalifate lasted only a little over 2 years, a remarkably short period given the magnitude of what he accomplished within it. He lived simply, continuing even as Khalifah to walk to the market himself, refusing a life of luxury, taking only a modest stipend from the public treasury, and reportedly trying to reduce even that stipend before his death, believing he had taken more from the Muslims than he should have. When he became ill and sensed his time was near, he consulted the senior companions about who should lead after him, ultimately recommending Umar ibn al-Khattab, a recommendation accepted by the wider community, ensuring that the same wisdom of careful, consultative succession that had stabilized his own rise would continue after him. When you step back and look at the totality of what Abu Bakr did in such an unbearably short span of time, the picture that emerges is staggering. He held the community together in the moment of its deepest psychological shock, with nothing but the truth spoken plainly. He prevented a tribal fracture between the Ansar and Muhajirun that could have torn the ummah apart from within before any external threat arrived. He drew an uncompromising line, defending the integrity of Islamic obligation against those who sought to dilute it for convenience. Even when his closest companions urged caution, he crushed the apostasy and rebellion that threatened to dissolve the entire religion back into the scattered tribal conflicts of pre-Islamic Arabia, and he authorized and protected the single act of preservation, the written compilation of the Qur'an, that ensured the literal words revealed to the Prophet would never be lost, altered, or forgotten. Each one of these alone would be the legacy of a great man, together, accomplished within roughly 27 months by someone who never sought power, who wept when given it, and who spent his final days worried he had taken too much from the public treasury. They represent something closer to a miracle of leadership, born from sincerity rather than ambition. There is a reason the Prophet, peace be upon him, said of Abu Bakr that if he were to take a close friend besides his Lord, he would have taken Abu Bakr as that friend, but that the brotherhood of Islam was sufficient between them. There is a reason Aisha, his own daughter and the wife of the Prophet, reported that her father was given preference in leading prayer behind the Prophet himself during his final illness, a sign the Prophet himself was indicating where his trust rested for the future of the community. And there is a reason that to this day, across the Muslim world, in every language, in every culture, he is remembered by the title Ash-Shiddiq, the one who always told and trusted the truth. Because in the single most dangerous moment in the history of this religion, when grief could have destroyed everything, when tribal politics could have fractured everything, when compromise could have hollowed out everything, and when carelessness could have lost the very words of the Qur'an itself, it was the truth, spoken and defended by this one humble merchant from Mecca, that held the entire structure together. If there is one lesson to carry from his life into your own, let it be this: the strength of true faith is not loud, it is not boastful, and it does not seek recognition. It shows up quietly in the hardest moments, says what is true even when it is unpopular, and serves without asking for anything in return. May Allah be pleased with Abu Bakr As-Siddiq, and may we be granted even a fraction of the sincerity that allowed one man to save a nation in its darkest hour.